Welcome back to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme park rides and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And today we're going to be talking about screens in rides and how they function as tools of, or destroyers of, the fourth wall. But first, hey Alice.
Yeah, buddy?
You and I both made special trips to our local movie theaters this weekend, right?
Separately, but with the same goal to watch the most ambitious crossover film ever, Marvel's Infinity War.
Avengers 3, the Infinity War, Mission Dash Breakout, and breakouts in a different fonts. Right, exclamation. And really, but, okay, so it is Sunday, April 29th, as we record, and I have just left the theater, and you went and saw this movie on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And we accidentally dropped about half an hour into just talking about this movie.
Yes, you don't get to hear that conversation. We're not going to spoil it for anybody, even if you're listening to this years down the line.
This is not a movie podcast, as much as sometimes I wish it was. This is not a movie podcast. This is a theme park ride podcast, but the kind of happy accident that maybe one of the biggest event films, definitely of our lifetimes, came out this weekend, and we were also thinking about the use of screens, which are often kind of movie-like in their use, right? For theme park rides, got me thinking, like, where do we draw the line, right? What is an attraction? What is not an attraction? And I heard people describing Infinity War as a roller coaster, or kind of like
emotions.
I mean, absolutely, but also kind of like a theme park ride where it's intense emotional experience after intense experience, and on. It went for 2.5 hours, so quickly that the time really flew by. And I wonder, like, you know, this is an attraction in its own way, right? We are drawn to it. We must go see it. It's just that the attraction comes to us, and it's not a place. And I think that might be where the line gets drawn.
I suppose so. But there are several different versions of what we would traditionally think of as theme park rides that involve the use of screens or short films or even movies. They're not wholly unconnected ideas, and this is why we wanted to talk a little bit about our movie-going experience this weekend, mostly because the movie was great and we can't stop talking about it. But we wanted to connect to this idea. I know, it's so good. We wanted to connect this idea of the movie-going experience, or perhaps just the sitting in front of a screen experience with theme park rides, and talk about which rides use those kind of screens and this kind of movie-type idea most effectively, and how that helps or hurts their narratives.
Yeah, for sure, because, we voluntarily pay money to sit down in front of movie screens, right? And we do so about as often as we can, I think, given our time commitments. But, there's a certain disrespect, I think, surrounding the idea of screens and rides, right? Screens are almost a dirty word. It's like, a screen ride. I'm like, ugh. But really, it's something that I've noticed while we kind of interact with people on Twitter, or as we kind of read about reactions to new rides, that if something gets put in and it's, say, a 3D movie with effects, a so-called 4D movie, right? Or if it's a basic simulator type ride with just a screen, there are negative reactions to that.
Right. And we could delve into this later, but I think some of that might come from the idea of these kind of sit down and watch a movie kind of rides feel almost outdated. Screen rides have been around for many, many years, or what we can maybe screen attractions might be more appropriate.
Yeah, screen
Things
attractions,
like
I think, is a wider net to cast.
is, I mean, it's one thing to go on a dark ride, for example, and ride through kind of like primitive, like practical effects, but a screen ride or a screen attraction in its early days might have been like, this is the height of technology. I'm thinking like Captain EO or something like that. Like,
That's funny.
sit down to watch a movie.
I was just about to mention Captain EO myself, like 70 millimeter full 3D projection, the hottest pop star in the world at the time, with the hottest filmmakers in the world at the time, an especially designed theater. Like,
right, and it might not have been the first screen ride, but it's definitely like an incredibly important, impactful one, where that they brought back for a little bit because it was like this big cultural touchstone. But because that technology's been around so long, just a typical screen attraction or ride might feel nowadays a little outdated. So they keep trying to, I don't know, one up themselves with new technologies to add and new things, water being sprayed in your face, or that's just like a simple addition, but they're trying to up their game with every new kind of screen attraction that we that gets put in.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about other 3 and 4D attractions like Muppet Vision 4D. Or is that just Muppet Vision 3D? Is that what it's called?
I think it's Muppet Vision 3D, but it has
the Muppet
all of
Vision
the same. The Muppet Vision, which has all of the same elements in it as, say, Shrek 4D, but it's only called Muppet Vision 3D. So, like, what is 4D versus 3D? Maybe we could talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I want to, when we start talking about screen rides and like their audience, I want to introduce our audience to a term they might not be intimately familiar with. You might know it maybe in passing, or maybe you've never heard of it at all. But I'd like to introduce the topic of the day, which is the fourth wall. So the fourth wall, you might already be familiar with the fourth wall, but for those who might need a refresher or who maybe have heard of it but don't know exactly what it means, the fourth wall is a construct in the theater, and it is the invisible wall that separates the audience from the action on stage. It is what allows you, the viewer, to look in on something you normally wouldn't be able to see. It's what makes theater so magical. You're taking out a wall in someone's life and seeing their innermost thoughts and actions. And this is probably public knowledge at this point, but that wall can be broken. And when you break the fourth wall is when the people on the stage turn to interact with the audience by addressing them directly as an audience. They are acknowledging that they are being watched. They're not just talking to nobody. They say, hey, audience, please interact with us. They might just ask you to pay close attention. They might ask you to actively interact, or even change the plot of what's going on. But that is what breaking the fourth wall is.
The fourth wall is extremely delicate. Yes. It is imaginary, and it's about the relationship between what's happening on stage or on a screen, or perhaps in a ride or attraction. It's that relationship between the performance and the audience that determines the strength of the fourth wall. And if that relationship falters, or if it's purposefully attacked, say in the case of one of the examples we're going to talk about, the fourth wall is dissolved almost immediately.
Right, and I think the fourth wall, when it comes to theme park rides, is deliberately broken all the time, in almost every single case. In a theme park ride, you want to involve your audience, and you want to to know that they're part of the ride and part of the experience, especially if you are marketing towards children. We can even just go back to the episode we had about Mission Breakout. And they're asking us, the audience, they say, hey, you're an audience. You're here to watch. Put up your hands and help out Rocket.
Right. If you don't put up your hands, then Rocket doesn't succeed. You've got to be part of this. You're drawn into the experience.
Right. It's a clap if you believe in fairies kind of thing, like from the Peter Pan, from the play.
And that's a
they turn to you, the audience. Right? Early classic example of it in the theater. And you turn to the audience and you ask them for help, and they are directly then affecting the story. And that's a pretty extreme example of breaking the fourth wall. But it doesn't have to be so obvious. It could just be Jim looking into the camera on The Office, or like acknowledging that there is someone watching.
Right, like the mugging the camera and being like, "Are you seeing this right now?" Because that's betraying a knowledge that this is being seen. Right, somebody is seeing it, and that's a little uncomfortable. That's a strange place to be. But like we were talking about earlier, Alice, there's one character that defines this fourth wall breaking.
Yeah, it's in fact built into his character and personality. And of course, we're going to just briefly talk about Deadpool. Deadpool would not be Deadpool if he didn't break the fourth wall. He breaks the fourth wall from the page, from the screen.
I do believe that Deadpool originally did not know he was in a comic book. And this is the product of a reboot. I could be wrong on that. Don't at me. But it is what defines his character in the modern context. It's what makes him stand out.
We know him.
You know, that's funny. We just did you also see the Deadpool trailer before Infinity War?
I did.
I was not excited for the Deadpool movie until I saw this trailer. When he turns to the audience and says, "Wow, you're dark. Are you from the DC universe?" And I was like, wow,
hey.
this is going to be a fourth wall shattering experience, just like the first one. There's a video game that Deadpool is in, Marvel vs. Capcom, where he can grab the health bar that he has and use it as a weapon.
So good.
Deadpool knows he's in a comic or a movie or a video game. He knows he's in whatever he's in. And for him, the fourth wall does not exist.
That's all sorts of meta and postmodern and ridiculous. He goes so much further past the fourth wall. I wish he had a theme park ride so we could talk about him on this podcast. Maybe we'll just start like a big old Twitter rant about Deadpool.
That would be very cool. But you know, that's the thing though. I feel like it's a bit that is best in isolated bursts. Because as audiences, we like the fourth wall, or we expect the fourth wall, and the joy of breaking the fourth wall, even a little bit, just like peeking around it like Jim in The Office, right? That joy comes from the shattering of our expectations as well. It says,
right,
you and I are in on this joke, right? Like, and that's not the best place for a storyteller to be. Because the storyteller wants you to believe the things that are happening on the stage or on the screen or around you, in the case of a ride, as real.
Right. They expect you, or they want you. The goal is for you to never experience, like, being suddenly becoming hyper aware of your surroundings. Like, oh, I'm sitting in a movie theater. This is all a joke. This is all fake. They really want you to become involved and stay involved.
Traditionally, they want your emotional involvement to be behind the fourth wall. But when the fourth wall is broken, you know, one of two things might happen, right?
That's true. There are pretty much two outcomes from breaking the fourth wall. And this is entirely dependent on how smooth the break is, and even down to personal preference and what kind of audience member you might be. The first thing that can happen, you might get sucked into the story, pulled into the action, and feel more involved than before. Like suddenly this becomes real and high stakes for you. This is usually how kids react to the breaking of a fourth wall. But of course, adults can feel it too. And especially if you're emotionally invested or particularly imaginative.
Yeah.
If the story is compelling enough, anybody can feel this way. You don't have to be a kid.
I think a good deal of how you react to fourth wall breaking, like you said, is about the smoothness and your investment. And I think it depends on you caring about that moment and being drawn in and wanting to be drawn in. It kind of reminds me of like cheesy hypnotists who are like, you can only be hypnotized if you want to be hypnotized, right? And you can only be drawn in by a fourth wall break if you want to be drawn in by a fourth wall break.
Right. Because the other option is, the other outcome here is that you kind of get jolted out of the moment. Like I'm saying, you suddenly become hyper aware, painfully aware of your surroundings, of your presence in a theater, in the uncomfortableness of your seat. And you suddenly become too aware that what you're seeing is fake. And that can jolt you out of it and ruin your experience, where you go, oh, well, the stakes aren't high anymore. This is really too bad. I was enjoying this.
I was having a good time, and now I'm not believing it anymore.
And now I don't believe it anymore. And this can happen. This is if the story is bad, or if the act of breaking the fourth wall is clunky or forced,
or maybe unexpected. And the description of it as painful, I think, is particularly apt, right? Because it sucks. It's a bad feeling. And we as a culture have this changing relationship with the fourth wall, I think, thanks to postmodernism and characters like Deadpool and other things. We're so bathed in media so that winking at media has become easier for us. But it sucks when you don't want it to happen. It's not fun.
Right. I'm the sort of person who gets a pretty big kick out of things like watching an actor break on live TV, or and I'm still like I said, like a little kid who's gonna raise my hands for Rocket Raccoon or clap if I believe in fairies or whatever. I am the sort of person who is more likely to be sucked into the story with a good fourth wall break. But a bad one, like, I don't like when in a 3D movie, when the characters on the screen go, oh, who's that in there watching us? And then the 3D effect has like their hand reaching into the theater, trying to like squat at us, or
the
like,
character comes out and like flies
somebody,
around,
you know,
or does something like that. That's
like,
so cheesy.
Who are all you people?
Oh my God.
And that really brings me out. And then I'm like, oh, cool. I'm wearing a cheap pair of 3D glasses. I'm sitting in a seat that might rock every once in a while. I don't like this.
It is an ineffective use of the technology. And that's weird because there's something special about what 3D can do, and maybe we'll get into this later, but those always look like they're directed just at you because of the way 3D technology works, right? Like, the thing comes out towards you, not towards somewhere else in the audience. Like, it comes to you.
Right. The hand reaches for you, the snake comes to bite at you,
I keep imagining that bloopy blue character from Muppet Vision, just like, it comes to you. It makes you feel special. So that's part of the joy of a 3D ride, right? Is that ability to have that relationship with whatever's happening. It happens to you, and that's really special, and it feels good when it's done right, but rarely is it done right, because everybody around you are painfully aware of is having that same just to you experience, and that's weird, and it can weird you out to be kind of invaded like that. And it can be used to scare or thrill, but rarely is it like friendly. And we don't feel that way towards theme park rides and attractions. We're not like, oh yeah, come on into like my space. We kind of want to keep that at arm's length because we're supposed to be thrilled. We're supposed to be jarred out of our usual. We're supposed to be experiencing something new. So like to have something that close and personal, I think is dangerous, from a design and storytelling standpoint.
It runs into a danger of becoming a really heavy crutch to lean on to substitute this kind of like superficial interaction of this is a 3D or, you know, not even all just straight 3D, but a screen to say you're seeing this, therefore you're experiencing something rather than actual. If you lean on that, you maybe are sacrificing actual physical immersion.
Yeah,
it's like a cheap substitute for an actual good immersive ride.
And I know plenty of people who will avoid 3D movies at the theater for that same reason, because those moments become heightened and uncanny and weird. We prefer 2 dimensions for storytelling because then there aren't any gimmicks like those moments that pull us out, that break the fourth wall. Here's an idea. The fourth wall is not important in traditional theme park rides and attractions, because the whole point, like we were just talking about with Mission Breakout and other rides like it, or even dark rides like we talked about in episode 2, the whole point is that they happen to you, not necessarily to characters that you watch. You become the character. And I hesitate to put a word to it because it isn't really interactivity. It's not about you taking part, and helping. We talked a little bit about this with Mission Breakout too. This kind of disingenuous feeling you get, like, oh yeah, I'm helping, haha. It's kind of like looking into the eye of Mara. Oh no, if I do or I don't, it doesn't matter. It's a track. We know it's a track, right?
Oh man, when I was at Disneyland last week, yes. I looked right into the eye. I looked directly in. Just stared it down. I even did that thing where I put my fingers, like I'm watching you, like that. And then of course, because
then you ended up in the halls of doom. Which that if you hadn't have looked, you would not have had to have experienced that very scary thing.
Yeah, but I'm gonna look every time.
So that's not really what happens though. It's not really interactive. It's more passive than interactivity, but it's less passive than watching a show. And I think that's an important balance to strike. Because the audience is asked many times in good rides to walk right through the fourth wall. In effective rides, the audience passes through the fourth wall as soon as they enter the queue. As soon as the pre-show begins, wherever you consider that to begin, you are walking through it. You are now in the world of this fiction. And that's really, really important. And it's not just a common thing. It's built right into those really effective rides. It's about how they set up their storytelling. Okay, hear me out for a second. I'm about to tell you that Ferris wheels have a very involved story involving their audiences. This is okay.
I can't even with you sometimes.
Hear me out, because this is.
Go on.
This
Convince me.
This is not. It's not that involved. It's not that deep of a story. The story is, you board a Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel goes around. It raises you up. It drops you back down. You go around a couple of times. You have fun while on it. It makes you feel an emotion. It makes you feel fun or thrilled. And then the ride is over and you get off. And you get off. This is a story about you on a Ferris wheel. It's outside of the ordinary and you take part in it. You don't interact with the Ferris wheel outside of maybe like swinging the chair, which is dangerous, and don't do that.
Don't do that.
But,
Children.
you take part. It is your story. Similarly, you board, say, a bookcase in Hogwarts, and you are drawn along by Harry and friends through a forbidden journey, and then you get off. They're not detached from each other. This is what rides are. They're a storytelling device that has no fourth wall. This is a story about you. In fact, I would go so far as to say they are stories told in the second person.
Ooh, I like that.
Right? First person stories are I do this, I do that. Third person stories are he, she, they do this, do that. Second person stories are you did this.
That's brilliant. But we don't talk about the second person often enough. People don't write in the second person very often.
That's because the second person
it's hard to read.
It's weird. So I was actually talking to somebody on Twitter about this, named Aaron Cayenne on Twitter, at Aaron Cayenne. Thank you so much for this conversation. Where we were talking about how there aren't many second-person audio dramas or podcasts. And we were trying to get to the bottom of why. And it really is a strange phenomenon, right? Like, how often do you hear stories about you personally listening to the story? It's weird. It's uncomfortable.
That's a really good point.
I think about the Welcome to Night Vale episode, Story About You, a lot. Have you listened to that one?
That's the best one.
It's really one of my favorites. Like, you go and do this, you go and do that, and you know this, and you know that. You have to be told all of that by Cecil, and that's what's upsetting, is that this is kind of about you, I guess, but it isn't. It's about a character that isn't you. And that's that delicate balance, that reaching through the fourth wall and then assigning character traits to the audience is completely shattered in most theme park rides and attractions. I would say, like, when Indiana Jones says, "Not bad for tourists," and, like, points at you and mugs you a little bit, that was like, you're telling me how I did, but I didn't do anything. So to kind of bring it back to screens, right? The fourth wall is not, it's not necessarily there in the first place. So the use of screens presents another question with the fourth wall. So I would say that screens on rides present another side of the fourth wall, or maybe another piece of the phenomenon. Because maybe what we're really worried about with screens, as fans of theme park rides, as riders, as second-person participants, what we're really worried about is that the screen brings the fourth wall back. It re-erects the fourth wall in front of us, because we know what a screen is, and it's not outside of the ordinary, and we are drawn out, and we didn't ask to be drawn out, and it's not a fun wink, and it's not effective, and we were hoping to achieve some escapism, which is then destroyed by the knowledge of how a screen works and the limits of the screen, or the presence of a screen where maybe it didn't belong. And I think that's the interesting thing about screens. When can we use them effectively? When do we reject them? And when do we find ourselves face to face with the fourth wall again, which is what theme park rides and theme parks in general are trying to destroy. They're trying to let you live in theater or drama or TV or film. They're trying to make you live in it. The screen brings it back.
No, that's a really, really interesting point. And I think that, and this is, of course, not to say, listening audience, before you start atting us, this is not necessarily to say that screen rides are going to be bad rides.
No, there are plenty of great screen rides
that we really like and that do tell effective stories. So maybe the question here today, and the topic of conversation, is not why are screens not good for rides, but rather what aspects of the good screen rides set them apart from the bad screen ride. So what specifically in a good screen ride or a ride with screens that we consider effective, what specifically makes it effective? And so maybe we should spend time picking out specific aspects of certain rides that we find good, certain ones that we find bad, and we can try and get to the bottom of this
thing.
And this thing. I'd like to ask, is this kind of existence or non-existence of the fourth wall more effective on something like a roller coaster, where the physicality of it kind of trumps the like maybe you're so distracted by the physicality of it that you forget maybe about the fourth wall, or maybe more something like a dark ride where any screens that you come across, if you're moving slower, you can kind of like be more drawn in to the story.
Yeah, you can kind of form more of a relationship with the screen, and then move past it.
Or is it best employed on a simulator like Star Tours, or just like a 4D experience, and I struggle with them calling it 4D because I don't think they know what dimensions are. So would it be roller coasters or dark rides or simulators, or just like a simple we're watching like a mini show, maybe with some interactive elements to it? Which of these types of rides maybe are most effective?
Well, Alice, that is a really good question. And I think I have a personal answer, and I'd like to make the case, if you'll allow me.
I'll allow it.
Good. Thank you so much, Your Honor. So here's the thing. Let's for a second set aside the 3D or 4D show. Let's put that aside as not really
quite a lot about it.
We've kind of given them a lashing here, and they don't always deserve it, but there's something to be said about the other options available for screen-based rides at theme parks. So the way I see it, there's kind of two competing sort of formats at work here. There's a formula that I refer to semi-affectionately as the universal formula, and this is extremely popular with their rides lately. And here's how it goes. They load the passengers into a car that moves through physical space. For example, at Islands of Adventure, the Spider-Man ride, it's a news van. It's a really strangely shaped news van, but it is a news van. In the Transformers ride, it is an actual Transformer, which is super strange. He goes from a human shape to a van shape, and then he's like, "Hop in, guys!" And that's strange to me, and raises all sorts of other questions, but that's not the point. In Escape from Gringotts, it is a minecart. It's one of those ones that you see in the movie.
Very appropriately themed.
Yeah, I would say that's probably maybe the strongest example of good theming, because that's a thing that already exists in the universe. And what each of these rides does, and there are other examples as well, is they move the car, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, through physical environments that then you end up in front of a screen, and that screen has some kind of effect, be it a 3D effect, or maybe the ride is in 2D. None of the ones that I've just listed are. Or maybe there's some sort of a physical foreground object that interacts with the audience. Maybe you get blasted with water or heat to simulate fire. Maybe it changes the way that the car moves.
Maybe you see in the Transformers ride the dead corpse of Starscream just there.
My God. Oh my God. No, that's Megatron at the end, right?
Is
you
it
just
Megatron?
drive past Megatron's rotting dead corpse.
Gosh, I think you're right. I think it is Megatron. His
he's
eyes
a
are
robot.
not glowing. It's very disturbing.
It's upsetting because there's no way that's canon, right? And anyways,
Moving on.
Moving on. And so each of these rides are very, very similar. You get a pair of 3D glasses as you go through, and it really does seem to be kind of the prevailing design philosophy, especially at Universal Studios. And my question, Alice, is, do we like this over the other format, which is just the classic simulator, I would say? The audience in a box or the audience on a specialized seating arrangement in front of a screen, paired with perhaps more extreme motions, but not actual four-dimensional motion, if that makes any sense, to
like,
misuse dimensions. But, it's all kind of in place in front of the screen.
Right, like Star Tours.
Like Star Tours. Or, Soarin', I would say, also qualifies as this kind of a ride. Or the Simpsons ride, what used to be the Back to the Future ride, where you are in a simulator that matches the motion of what you see on the screen in a way that's convincing enough, in most cases, that you are moving the way that the screen is showing you moving. And I wonder, like, Universal formula, much more physical, lots of extra space, more opportunities for 3D objects, versus the simulator formula, which is more widely used and maybe simpler, but doesn't have that depth, that depth of field. Because honestly, and this is weird, because you feel like describing them, you might feel the opposite, but I kind of get sucked right out of Universal Formula rides.
Oh, really?
Really, I find them to be so samey, and looking at them while I'm on them, I'm like, I see how they're doing this, I see how they're doing this. I would say one big counterexample would be Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, which I do not get sucked out of. But I would say that's because it's such a novel movement system, compared to these other ones, which are van, screen to screen.
It's a car. You're driving in a car. You kind of feel like you're on wheels, rather than like on Forbidden Journey where you feel like you're flying. And so that additional level of, oh, this is a cool feeling. I like this. I'm into it. Like,
yeah.
like that is more likely to draw you into the immersivity of the moment that you're in.
I mean, like, this is why I'll ride Soarin' again and again and again, or why I'll ride Star Tours again and again and again, even before the refurb. Well, two reasons. I love the idea of feeling flying, and Soarin' really does that for you. And I love Star Wars, and Star Tours really feels like it puts you there. And I will, every time I go to Universal Studios Hollywood, skip the Transformers ride, because I just don't get that feeling. I would actually rather ride the Simpsons ride, which is so funny because it's much simpler.
I disagree.
I'm glad you do, because we should have spirited debate on this podcast.
We should. I don't love the Simpsons ride.
Well, let me be perfectly clear. Back to the Future ride was a better ride, and the Simpsons ride has a lot of badness about it, including probably the worst possible 3D models for the Simpsons themselves.
No, they're very bad.
They're very bad.
Very, very bad.
And it does not look good anymore, but I prefer it to the Transformers ride, which I guess makes me garbage, actually.
We already knew you were garbage.
Right.
But
theme park trash.
You're theme park trash. I would choose the Transformers ride over the Simpsons ride, given the choice. And not because I particularly love the Transformers ride, although I kind of do. I find it more physically thrilling. Transformers ride is surprisingly speedy. It feels a little more roller coaster, not actually like a roller coaster, but I feel more like physical, adrenaline, like involved. Whereas the Simpsons ride, I guess maybe because the Simpsons ride such a big screen and you're such a small car, and I could look to the left and right and see like 7 other cars doing the same thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel as immersive or compelling to me.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think we're kind of hitting a point where it does come down to taste in what you prefer to experience.
True.
But Star Tours, I think, is a really special example.
It's a
because
really good ride.
right, it not only is it an earlier ride in terms of when it was introduced, but I think it does something extra that really solves a lot of the problems of at least the simulator format. Which is, it puts you in a physical, very detailed, very well themed cockpit area, I would say. Well, you're in the passenger area, but you can look in on the cockpit.
Yeah.
The fourth wall lowers, and your pilot, be it Rex or C-3PO, depending on the era, is revealed. Rip Rex. Your pilot is revealed, and they're real and physical and there and with you, and they react accordingly to what's happening, and they can provide extra information, and they can interact with the set that they're on because there are controls next to them. And there's the additional screen, the comm screen, where X-Wing pilots or Poe or Finn can call in and talk to you. And then there's the hologram projection with the 3D glasses, and all of that, like, drags you right in. And you don't need more motion because Star Tours has that extra depth. It has that extra layer that says this is a real thing that is happening. It actually, I think, kind of pulls the fourth wall back up a little bit so that you can, just for a little bit, believe the screen. Believe the screen is real.
You become a passenger again. And like you would just be a passenger on a roller coaster or a passenger on the Ferris wheel even, where you are no longer, you're part of the story, you yourself, part of the story, but you're not asked to help or participate or anything. You are innocent bystanders in this other story that you are lucky enough to witness. And that's where that fourth wall comes back up. You get to see action happening, feel like it's happening around you and with you, but you're not asked to play.
And Star Tours is such a special ride to me, and it definitely is getting its own episode eventually. Maybe around the time when Solo comes out. But now we're just using it as an example here. We'll really dive into Star Tours, and I believe we'll be diving into its presence in the canon, which is very important to me, but not actually relevant to this podcast, and it's different ways you can ride Star Tours, the variability of Star Tours. But that's another episode. We're just talking about its use of the screen right now.
Right. And I think Star Tours, in addition to having a really good screen and simulator format, is also the best current use of 3D glasses in the ride. The 3D is not reaching out at you. It's not trying to grab you. You don't have the 3D coming to interact with you, the rider. It simply allows you, it simply gives you this deeper view, this like, it just expands the screen back further. It makes the space that you're in feel bigger and more intense. The only thing right now, see, Star Tours is also right that changes often enough.
Sure.
Nowadays changes. So like like you said in the Naboo ending, when it is a wholly variant ride, you do kind of get a 3D moment where something pops out at you.
It pops through the screen. And there's even a kind of, and this is one of my least favorite things on the ride, there's a moment where Darth Vader seems to kind of reach through. When he stops the Star Speeder, he goes, stop, and his hand is way bigger than it should be. It's like he's reaching through.
Ooh, no, I don't like that. They don't really do that with Kylo in the version that's playing right now in April 2018.
To date the
Kylo,
podcast.
Kylo Ren will stop the speeder, but he's at a far enough distance that actually the 3D glasses make him look further away, and more, instead of just like on a screen, like in a flat space, he looks far away.
He looks like he's part of depth, this added depth. And often I think Star Tours really pulls that off, and that's about restraint, I would say, because there are specific 3D effect moments, such as the holograms.
That is enhanced by the 3D.
Yeah, and that's
look
extra,
good.
right? Because it's explained in the universe. Of course, a hologram is right here in front of me from my perspective, because that's how holograms work. So it's not weird. It's not a weird moment. And usually it's a beloved character, so it's not extra weird that it's like popping out at me. Like,
and he's not
Maz Kanata's just there.
Because like
she's in the center of the room.
She's dead center in the room. She's not like looking you in the eye. She's being presented to you, the unfortunate passengers on
the whole group of passengers
on a Star Tour.
On a Star Tour. The oh my gosh, we can't talk about the canon. Let's not do it right now.
No, we have a whole episode for it. We will. Yes. I promise, dear listeners, we will.
We will. So Star Tours is wonderful at that. And I think, again, that added depth and that restraint of 3D and the use of the screen as a deep field view that would be impossible elsewhere, I think is the most appropriate way to approach screens in theme park rides. And for me, it really is the gold standard. You know, I was also I was singing the praises of Forbidden Journey, and we were talking to some of our good contributors on Twitter. We'll shout you guys out soon. And the way that in Forbidden Journey, the practical sets and like such as the Whomping Willow or the Dementor or the Dragon's Face, they don't perfectly match with the screens, what you see on the screens, but they are there and they add depth and they're interactable and they're 3D, truly 3D. They're physical, and you can almost reach out and touch them, and that makes that ride more effective for me as well. And if you ask me, in some of the later Universal Formula rides, there isn't enough of that. There isn't enough physical dark ride stuff being done to enhance the how you say, immersivity.
Please never do that again.
Okay, I won't. Okay, so the Spider-Man ride, which is a 3D ride through the cartoon Spider-Man universe, opened in 1999, and it features amazing practical set work, such as a giant floating Statue of Liberty head that kind of rolls towards the audience. It's really cool. It's scary. It's big. It's larger than life. There are vans. I was just rewatching this in preparation for the episode, and I was really impressed when we wrote it a couple of years ago. That this ride really does hold up, and it's been refurbished since 1999. They've updated the CG, but it really works. And there's water, and there's heat for fire, and there's really cool stuff done with perspective for the ride. At one point, you start floating up, and then some of the ride takes place backwards. It's really cool, and I think that's the kind of restraint and combination that you could see as more effective, instead of feeling like a cheap cop-out. In the case of Fast and the Furious, supercharged in a different font, there's...
You're kidding.
No, that's really how it's presented. Right. In the case of Fast and the Furious, there's a weird thing happening in terms of the fan response. And I've been seeing this on Twitter and kind of standing back because I haven't ridden the ride. But I have watched on-ride videos, and I've asked people for their perspective, and the short answer is there is a hologram portion of the ride where the actors have been captured and put into hologram form, so they look kind of realistic, interacting with these kind of deeper sets. If you've ever been to, for example, Forbidden Journey. Again, hate to keep leaning on it, Forbidden Journey, but Forbidden Journey has this, Escape from Gringotts has this as part of the queue. These are part of the ride. You kind of drive into a room where this happens. And then you drive forward on your party bus. Yes, that's what it's called. And it's shaped exactly like the trams for the Universal Studios studio tour in Hollywood, because it is a retread of that attraction. It is a 360-degree screen where a car gets chased and 3D renderings of your favorite Fast and the Furious characters jump around, and the bus kind of wiggles and air is blown on you to simulate speed.
Oh my god, it's literally the same.
It's the exact same ride. And it's received a lot of criticism. It is actually the same ride, and the tram or party bus, whichever one you are on, doesn't move. The action takes place completely around it, and it doesn't immerse the audience effectively.
Even though you're quite literally surrounded on all sides by a screen.
Surrounded on all sides by sounds and fury and pretty lights, but no actual immersion happens for these audiences that are walking out of this ride. And I know that the ride has its fans, and there are people who really like Fast and the Furious for whom this is, a big deal. But it doesn't strike a chord with general audiences, is the general feeling I'm getting. I think that's because it's, unlike even the other Universal Formula rides, it doesn't move you from screen to screen. There's no actual motion. The reliance on CG and the screens is overdone without restraint. And the practicality of the set is not there. It's non-existent.
Right. You're essentially watching a 7 minute?
Yeah, 7-ish. It's not very long at all.
You're watching basically a 7-ish minute long short animated film, computer generated animated film set in the Fast and the Furious universe, featuring CG versions of characters that you maybe love if you're a big fan of the franchise, but you maybe just be vaguely familiar with, like me. I could tell you who Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Vin Diesel are, but
they are actors.
They are actors. Good-looking ones at that, but they are like 3D, like CG 3D, like avatars of these guys in a short film.
I do believe there's some compositing that does happen, right? They're not entirely CG'd, but it certainly does not look good.
I think as soon as they go into the chase, if it's anything like the one at Hollywood, is as part of the tram ride, if it's anything like that at all, the second that the actual chase starts happening, the entire thing is computer generated.
Yeah.
100% of it.
I have a really hard time with attractions like this. There's a second one like it in Hollywood that is King Kong, right? And the King Kong one has always underwhelmed, in my opinion. It was cool about once. You hold on to your 3D glasses for the duration of the 90-minute studio tour. They say, put them on to protect you from Kong. Oh, wait, as an aside, can we have an aside?
Aside? Yes. Step over here into my office.
Okay, I sat down. As an aside, how tired are you of rides trying to find a story reason for you to wear clunky glasses?
Oh my god, I'm so sick of it.
Put your safety goggles on. Put your visors on. It's
usually safety goggles. They're like 99% it's safety goggles.
And I mean, like, first of all, find another thing for it to be. They are not just safe. They are 3D glasses, first of all. They're not protecting anybody's face. But then, that breaks the fourth wall. That breaks the immersion. Does everybody have their 3D glasses? It's time for the 3D special effects show to start. Like, Ugh, really? I think actually Muppet Vision does this. No, Muppet Vision calls them safety goggles because the conceit is that it's
Everyone calls them
Muppet
safety
Vision Labs.
goggles.
Yep, they're all safety goggles.
And it's weird.
Like, please,
It's whatever.
please, if you are designing a 3D ride, if anybody out there is actually related to theme park design, and you're designing a 3D ride, do something better than calling your 3D glasses safety goggles.
There
Please.
has to be a better way.
There must be a better way. Please, anything.
All right,
I don't care. Okay, so back to on topic. Those rides always underwhelm because they're just movies on specialized screens, and the motion is never enough. The interactivity that you have with the world is never enough. Rides like that simply don't do it for me. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's just not. It's not a responsible, not an effective use of screens.
Mm-mm. I agree.
You agree?
I do. There's really just one more, like, littler version of this, even like literally,
Yeah,
smaller version of this.
Smaller use.
Smaller use of this, which is the quite literal opposite of the universal formula, which is like usually in a dark ride, where they add little screens to physical parts of the ride.
Yeah, either projections
or
projections or specialized screens that show you an animation, or that they're used to make depth more apparent. And I think this is a pretty good use of a screen. I'm imagining, for example, Radiator Springs Racers, which is an extremely popular ride, and all of the cars are their eyes are screens, right? They're projected. And not to mention there are a couple of other screen effects, such as Mater jumping over the moon with the cows, and things like that you probably couldn't do with animatronics, or that would look strange with animatronics. The Alice in Wonderland dark ride, since its recent refurb at Disneyland, has a few screens with actual animation from the movie and some new stuff as well that I think work okay. They work pretty well. Though I would say a caution on that is that if it looks substantially different between the screen and the real-life character or animatronic that you're adding to the ride, it can be jarring. It can be like, oh, she looks different here than she did on the screen a second ago. And there's
it's really dark in here, and oh, his eyes are very glowy.
Yeah,
oh, goodness.
Things like that are technical, I think, or design challenges that need to be overcome if this continues to be a useful thing for ride designers. And I would also say
it'll only get better.
Yeah, it's probably only going to get better, and I think that this is a good balance because the dark ride mentality is maintained, creating a 3D environment that people actually move through and experience in that way. You can add things like, for example, on the Navi River journey in Orlando, which I have not ridden, but I have seen videos of, there are screens behind plants and things like that kind of increase the depth, make the world feel more alive, where there would normally be, say, a black wall or a matte painting. These are screens, and I think that's effective as well. Where you can kind of blow out the walls, so to speak, to use a phrase from Charles Gustine, one of our many contributors. Blow out the walls of the show building and kind of say, it's bigger than it looks. It's bigger on the inside. And that's something that screens really can bring that to, especially the dark ride.
Yes, I think, I think this use of screens will only get more and more effective. The only problem becomes when they become the only piece of tech in the room to fail, and suddenly you have Lightning McQueen with no eyeballs, and that might freak a child out.
I believe that
that's just like any It's just like anything, like when the music fails on Jurassic Park and it becomes the least high stakes drop ride.
The totally underwhelming drop ride. Yeah, and the Frozen ride at Epcot, I think, uses a lot of this projection technology, and Elsa's face not being there is a real problem. A huge problem.
There are a lot of children.
A shut down the ride level problem, whereas Elsa may be missing a cue if she were just a pure animatronic with no projection, may be less drastic.
It might just be a bummer, but they wouldn't shut the ride down.
Right. So there are certainly dangers related to using projection and screens on dark rides. But I think, Alice, that means we've covered all of the screen usages that we've encountered or that we have comments on.
Yeah, I think we did a pretty thorough job of that. Of course, we'd love to continue this conversation with you, our listeners, on Twitter.
Yeah, that's right.
We love our Twitter followers and our Twitter contributors.
Let's go to some of the responses that I got when I asked people about their experiences with screens on rides. So this first one comes from Caps for Sale, who in our previous encounter I referred to as Caps for Sale.
Caps.
And Caps. I'm still going to say it 3 times, even though I know that your at is Caps for Sale. And Caps says, the most underwhelming screen experience of the past year for him was Jimmy Fallon's Race Through New York, which is an attraction at Orlando Universal Studios, which he describes as literally just a screen, some motion, and some subtle smells. So for me, this really does kind of mirror the criticism of Supercharged, where you can put a very fancy screen in front of people and you can put the 3D glasses on them and everything, but there has to be more. Alice, did you take a look at this ride? Because I did.
No, I didn't, because honestly, if it's if the majority of the ride is smells, I feel like you have to be there.
Right.
But then also the idea of a ride called Race to New York and then its big feature being smells, as someone who currently lives in New York, I'm not interested. I'm incredibly uninterested in the smells of New York.
You don't want to smell everything New York has to offer?
Most of New York smells very bad. Not interested.
No. And the thing about rides and screens and motion and smells is I was reminded by that comment of Soarin' Over California or Soarin' Over the World.
Soarin' crushes its smell game. When it was Soarin' Over California, when you would go over those orange groves, it smelled like an orange grove. You smelled the leaves and the dirt and the oranges, and oh my God, it was absolutely perfect. It was beautiful.
Definitely, and
10 out of 10.
I think we kind of got somewhere, and I'd like to move on to another comment here from our good friend and contributor Charles Gustine of the Iconography podcast. Everybody, please go listen to Iconography. It is a triumph.
It's so good.
And he says that Soarin' is a perfect example because the engineering problem and the thrill of Soarin' is how can we make you feel flying with some motion, a screen, and some smells. And I think, Charles, you are completely right. By having a specialized screen and a specialized goal, which is feel like flying, not necessarily make you smell New York, which is not a good goal. You should never try to reach it.
Or even not necessarily tell you a story.
Right, but Soarin' is there to make you feel a feeling.
Let's fly.
And film on a screen with the right kind of motion can make you feel that. And I was talking to somebody about Flight of Passage, and they say that this is a very similar thing at the Animal Kingdom, Flight of Passage, that it is definitely just motion in front of a screen, but the seat and the kind of bike type seat that they put you on kind of interacts with you in a way that also enhances the believability, makes you feel like you're riding a creature. which is something that can't be communicated on a ride video. So I'm interested, Alice, maybe when you go later this spring, what you think of that ride.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to make sure to stop by. I'm going in the middle of May.
Nice.
So I will definitely report back.
And that conversation was another one that I had with Caps for Sale, that the creature really feels like it's flying, and that you are on it doing that. So that's a really cool fact that, again, a screen ride is enhanced by appropriate motion, by being specialized, by making you want to feel a certain thing, and by going for that with its engineering, not simply by making you feel like you're in the middle of a King Kong. I don't know what that attraction is. So one more. I was talking to Dan of the Tomorrow Society, and his Twitter handle is @TomorrowSoc, SOC, short for society, I believe. And he was saying that he really prefers physical environments because you're not held at a distance. And that's really interesting, that the distance between the audience and a screen is whatever depth is put on screen, right? And then kind of a wall, because that's where the screen has to be, and then more distance, and then wherever you observe the screen for. There is quite a lot of separation. And not having a screen removes at least that extra depth that's on the screen, plus the distance you have to be from the screen to observe it. You can really be moving through plants or creatures or a hidden temple, and if you're building that and you're on it, you're not separated. And I think that's really interesting, because we were talking about distance as a good thing in, like, Star Tours, right? The use of distance. And the way that the depth actually enhances
Maybe
that.
not so much distance as, yes, depth over distance.
Yeah, and I think depth and distance, I think they don't just have different connotations. I think they mean different things. So, like, depth means it's good how deep you can see, right? It's a positive thing. Whereas distance feels dry and unoccupied and empty. Depth feels full. And I think that's what designers should be going for, is depth. So that's a really interesting distinction that I don't think we'd get if we weren't talking to our great Twitter followers. So thank you guys so much for contributing.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We love Twitter. Please interact and follow us on Twitter, and essentially help us write all of our episodes.
Yes, make us sound smarter than we are. Thank you for listening to Those Happy Places. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
The research for this episode was done by Alice White and edited by Buddy Duquesne.
This episode was produced by Alice White and edited by Buddy Duquesne.
Our theme music is Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers, featuring Phil Alvin. You can find the Feetwarmers on YouTube or on their website, CaliforniaFeetwarmers.com. Additional music for this episode came from Poddington Bear, available on the Free Music Archive. Look him up, he's amazing.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. Send people to our website at www.thosehappyplaces.com and join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/thosehappyplaces, where we're always talking about theme parks and ideas for future episodes. We're also on Twitter.
That's right, I'm @Buddy_Duquesne. Duquesne is spelled DUQUESNE.
And I'm @AliceWhiteTHP for Those Happy Places.
Thanks for listening. We hope you return to Those Happy Places.